Today we're learning Parshat Behar on page 697 of our scroll Chumash. Parshat Behar has 24 mitzvot, 17 negative commandments and 7 positive. It starts with laws of Shemitah, sabbatical year, the 7th year in a 7-year cycle. And it starts with the famous words, "Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe Bahar Sinai lemor." Hashem spoke to Moshe on Har Sinai, which means that it's telling us that when Moshe was on the mountain, Mount Sinai, not only was writing the 10 commandments, which he brought down from the mountain, but Hashem gave him the entire Torah, both the written Torah and the oral Torah. And that's what our sages say, that just like the laws of Shemitah, which were not applicable to them in the desert, they were in the desert for the next 40 years. For the next 40 years they will not need the laws of Shemitah. And not only that, when they came to the land of Israel, until they fully settled it, which means they conquered it and they divided it between tribes, these laws were not applicable. So that means for the next 54 years, because that's how much it took them to conquer, 7 years to conquer and 7 years to settle, to divide and settle. For the next 54 years, these laws are not applicable. So why is Hashem giving these laws on Har Sinai? And it's to tell you that all the laws were given to Moshe by God on the Mount Sinai, even those that were not necessary at that moment, but the entire package was already given over. And that's why he had to spend 40 days and 40 nights without sleep, without eating, just the entire time learning, absorbing information. So the Pasuk 2 says, "The land shall observe a Shabbat rest for Hashem," which means that just like we have Shabbat during the week, for 6 days we work, and 7th day we rest, so too the land has to rest. For 6 years we make the land work, we plow and plant it, and the land produces food for us. So too, just like the land has to rest in the 7th year. Now,
right here for class or upstairs?
We're going to have a separate meeting.
Rabbi, was it right?
Yeah.
the laws that are applicable on the 7th year are in Pasuk 6. And that is, for 6 years you may sow your field, and for 6 years you may prune your vineyard, and you may gather its crop. But the 7th year shall be a complete rest for the land. We're not allowed to sow, not allowed to prune, not allowed to reap, harvest. And then in Pasuk 6, what should be done with the food that grows by itself? When you collect grain, like wheat, from the field, some kernels of wheat fall down on the ground, and you don't bother to pick them up one by one. But then the following year, many of them grow by themselves. So what happens to that? Are you allowed to benefit from it? Or if you have fruit trees or vineyard, even if you don't plant it, it still produces fruit from year to year. If it produces fruit in the 7th year, are you allowed to use it? And this is important to learn specifically this year, because this year is the Shemitah year in Israel. So the Torah says in Pasuk 6, "The Shabbat produce of the land shall be yours to eat," which means you are allowed to eat it. It's still kosher for you, for your slaves, for your maidservants, for your laborer, and for your resident who dwell with you, and for your animals, and wild animals that are in your land shall all its crop be to eat. But what does it mean? That means that just like it is permissible for you to collect your crop, so too your animals can walk in the field, so too wild animals. Usually, we don't let wild animals into our field. Now the Torah says wild animals are also allowed to come in. That means you're supposed to open up your field, not close it, not lock it, not guard it, and whoever wants can come in, whether it's a neighbor, a stranger, passerby, or an animal. You have to make all your fields, whether for grain or trees, ownerless, hefker. And you become like anyone else. And this is a reminder for us that the land does not belong to us. We are just temporary residents on this earth. And the land belongs to God.
So that's for the 7th year only, right?
7th year only. For 6 years, you work the land and you feel like you are the boss. But then, that you shouldn't forget, in the 7th year, Hashem tells you, stop. Give the land back to me. Allow all citizens of earth, both man and animals, benefit from it. And you as well. But you cannot harvest it in order to sell, and you cannot protect it. Which means you can take as much as you want for your family to eat, but not more. You're not allowed to store. And not only that, even if you took and you have it in your house a little bit extra, so that you shouldn't go to the field every day, but then if you notice that animals and people, they consumed all the fruits of the field, you have to bring out what you have at home and share with them. You're only allowed to keep at home a little bit more than you need, as long as there is still available in the field. Once it's gone in the field, you're not allowed to keep it at home. You have to bring it out in the field and then just take as much as you need for that day. This is the cycle of 7 years. But then we have another, bigger cycle, 7 times 7 years. And that's Pasuk 8. You shall count for yourself 7 cycles of sabbatical years. 7 years, 7 times. And it shall be for you 49 years. The 49 years is the bigger cycle, and then the 50th year is called Yovel, Jubilee year. By the way, the English word Jubilee and Russian word Jubilee comes from the Hebrew word Yovel, which means 50th year, after cycle of 7 times 7 years. So what happens is that the 49th year is Shemitah, because that's the 7th year, and then the 50th year is Yovel. And the laws for Yovel are that number 1, on Yom Kippur of that year, of the 50th year, we have to sound shofar throughout the land. And then on the next page, in Pasuk 10, it says, sanctify the 50th year and proclaim freedom throughout the land for all its inhabitants. It shall be the Jubilee year for you. So what does it mean, freedom? You shall return each man to his ancestral heritage. Which means that any land that belongs to his ancestral heritage, that the person sold, let's say he was poor and he sold the land, in the 50th year, in the year of Jubilee, all the land comes back to its original owner. Then the Torah says, return each man to his family, which means that if a man sold himself as a slave, or Beit Din sold him as a slave, he must be released and be again a free man in the year of Jubilee. The same applies to 7th year. A Jewish slave can only work for 6 years. In the 7th year, he goes free. However, he has option that if he really likes to stay with his master, he likes the conditions, the working conditions, and the accommodations and the food, he has option to stay and be a slave longer, but only until the Jubilee year. After that, he and his children who came with him into the slavery go out to be free men again.
So it's a must.
It's a must, right? Torah doesn't want one family to be always poor. Let's say they sold all their land and then now they're going to be poor forever. No. In the 50th year, they're going to get their land back and they will have a chance to start again. And the Torah...
But only for 1 year.
No, forever.
Oh,
That's
forever.
it. It comes back to them. And now if they want, they can sell it again. Or they can now try again being farmers and maybe...
That's interesting.
They have to buy the land back, or
They don't have
for
to
free.
buy the land
That's
back.
interesting. It's like what you bought 50 years back.
Yes, so that means that you don't really buy land. You only lease it for
It's like losing
49
for 50
years.
But
And-
that means they also be free for 2 years then, right? If they on the 49th year they choose to leave, right?
Yeah.
So they could
Once
be
they
up to
choose
2
to,
years.
they can leave any one of the 7th years, Shemitah.
Mhm.
But if they don't, then 50th year they must go free. Because again, the Torah does not want someone to be a slave forever.
Also, on the 50th years they're going
50th
free forever.
Here, the slaves go free, Jewish slaves go free forever, and they get their land back.
And then if they want, they could again become slaves, right?
Yes, yes. So imagine a person became poor, he sold his land, and then he couldn't survive, he used up his money, and he sold himself as a slave. Now he doesn't have land and he doesn't even have possession of himself. He works, but the master feeds him, he gives him a place to sleep, and he works. In the 50th year, he must go free. And it doesn't mean that it's 50th year from when he sold himself. No, it's the 50th universal year. So if he sold himself, let's say 5 years before, 50th year he has to go free. And if it was 30 years, then after 30 years he goes free. But at least his children and his grandchildren don't have the slave mentality. They become free people by getting their land back, and they can try become free men again. What are the other laws of Yovel, Jubilee year? You shall not sow and you shall not harvest. So again, just like Shemitah, Yovel, we're not allowed to work the land. So then, again, what comes out is that 49th year and 50th year, all the Jewish people are free. They have vacation for 2 years. And what they do, instead of being farmers, they work on self-development. They learn Torah, they develop their connection to Hashem, and this way, even someone who is working full-time, every 6 years, for 1 year, entire year, he's free and he can learn Torah for the whole year, and in the 50th year for 2 years.
That's because they cannot
Work the land, since most people were farmers, and you cannot.
So it's prohibited to work the
It's
land.
prohibited to work the land.
Mhm.
Therefore, they have free time for the entire year.
So they're supposed to save enough money to last for 1 year
We're
without
gonna-
working.
Yes, we're gonna see next page. What should they do if for the whole year or for 2 years in a row they're not gonna work? How are they gonna survive? Now, in Pasuk 14, it talks about the sale of land. When you make a sale to your fellow or make a purchase from the hand of your fellow, how should you do it? Do not aggrieve one another, which means don't cheat. How can you cheat? And Pasuk 15 explains, according to the number of years after the Jubilee year, shall you buy from your fellow. You prorate it. which means if regular price, for example, is $50,000 for this piece of land. So this $50,000 is for 50 years. So if already, let's say, 20 years passed, and now you want to buy it, you're only supposed to buy it for $30,000. And that's what it says. According to the number of crop years shall he sell to you. So really, you're not buying land, but you're buying number of crops. For he is selling you the number of crops, the pasuk says. You cannot say, I'm the owner of this land. The land belongs to me. No, the land doesn't belong to you. What belongs to you is just the merit to plow, plant, and harvest the crop. Then there is a guarantee that Hashem gives us in Pasuk 18, which applies even today. You shall perform my decrees and observe my ordinances and perform them. Then you shall dwell securely on the land. Amen. This gives us the recipe for peace in Israel. Not making peace deals with the Arabs, but rather performing God's decrees and observing His ordinances. Then shall you dwell securely in the land. And it explains why Israel right now needs such a big military and needs to be always ready for attack, because God is not on their side, unfortunately, because He is upset by what's going on in the land.
So that they don't give the land away? That's...
No, it says all my ordinances. You shall perform my decrees and observe my ordinances. Which refers to all of them. Keeping Shabbat, and most of Israel doesn't. Keeping family purity, keeping away from forbidden sexual relations, having a government that runs on the laws of Torah, all that is a requirement. And then the land, the next page, Pasuk 19, the land will give its fruit, and you will eat your fill, and you will dwell securely upon it. Now, the Torah asks the question that Alex asked in Pasuk 20. If you will say, what will we eat in the 7th year? Behold, we will not sow and not gather in our crops. Right? How will we survive? We don't have a bank, we don't have a supermarket where they preserve food on a shelf in a refrigerator or freezer. And we don't have other jobs. We are farmers. So Pasuk 21 says, I will ordain my blessing for you in the 6th year, and it will yield a crop sufficient for the 3-year period. So God promises, you don't have to collect a little bit on the 1st year, a little bit on the 2nd year, a little bit on the 3rd, and slowly limit yourself how much you consume, and this way have enough. This is what happened with Yosef in Egypt. When he was the viceroy, he told Pharaoh, in 7 years there's going to be a famine. Prepare people right now. Don't let them consume everything. Save 20% every year. You don't have to do that. Leave normally first 5 years. Eat everything. In the 6th year, the land will produce triple.
For the 6th, 7th, and the 8th.
For 6th, 7th, and 8th year. Right. Because in the 8th year, you still have to plant, you still have to wait until it grows, and for all these months, you still need to eat. I will ordain my blessing for you in the 6th year, and it will yield a crop sufficient for the 3-year period. You will only sow in the 8th year, but you will eat from the old crop until the 9th year, until the arrival of the 8th year's crop. You will eat the old. And if it's a Jubilee year, then you need it. For the end of 48th year, you need 49th year, 50th year, until the middle of 51st year. So almost for 4 years, the land is going to produce. Now, this is very surprising because we know that farmers use something called crop rotation. They don't plant on the same land, same thing for too long. Because if you do, the land gets depleted. They either let the land lie fallow, which means not plant it at all, or they plant a different crop that uses different nutrients, and it will allow the land to replenish its nutrients for the other crop. But this is not what the Torah is telling us to do. The Torah is not telling us for 6 years plant over here and 6 years in a different place and let it rest, or 1 year let it rest and plant somewhere else. No, your entire land has to rest, and for 6 years your entire land is being worked. So you would expect that in the 6th year it should be the smallest crop, because for 5 years it's using its nutrients. In the 6th year there is not much left. 6th year should be the smallest, and instead Hashem's promises the 6th year is going to be the biggest. Not only biggest, it's going to be triple. You cannot explain it other than a miracle. Now, you ask yourself, who would, in his right mind, if he was writing a book of law to people, let's say we're writing American Constitution, would we write such a law? Don't take precautions. Enjoy it, everything, first 5 years. And the 6th year, when the land is weak already, plant, and I promise it's going to give a big harvest. And don't work 7th year at all. It's like you're setting yourself up for failure. In the first cycle of 7 years, if people believe you, let's say you're a very charismatic leader, they're going to believe you. They're going to wait until the 6th year. 6th year is going to come. The land is, you're lucky if it's going to produce the same amount as the previous year. It's not going to produce triple. All the people are going to be disappointed. And they're going to kick you out from the office. And they're not even going to keep the 7th year. They're going to go work because they have nothing to eat. And even if you convince them, it was just the hurricane came or something, there was a drought. Wait, next year is going to work. Next cycle. And even if they believe you and they wait for another cycle, again, next 6th year is going to come and again nothing. It's not going to last. So this is a very strange law, right? Anyone who says that Moshe wrote this law himself, or anyone says that a committee of nice smart Jews wrote this law, doesn't make sense. And even if they convince the people about it, how long would it last? And we know it lasted. It lasted and it worked. And people kept Shemitah.
When did they stop keeping Shemitah?
Well, officially, after they were exiled and Beit HaMikdash was destroyed,
We still keep the Shemitah.
we still keep it, but nowadays it's rabbinic. Because according to the Torah, you only have to keep it when Jewish people live on the land, when the majority of the Jewish people are in Israel. And that didn't happen already for 2,000 years, maybe even more. Since the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash, majority of Jews lived outside of the land of Israel.
So this is a proof that Torah was written by...
Because if it worked, and it's impossible to explain it other than in a miraculous way, you have to say that no human would write it, and even if he wrote it, he would not be able to make it happen.
And he would put himself in a very weak position, in the weakest position possible.
Yes. Now,
But Rabbi, the saying that says 7 good years, 7 bad years, it's not coming from this, from something else?
No, it's come from Yosef.
From Yosef.
When Paro had a dream,
Okay.
and Yosef interpreted it that it's going to be 7 good years and 7 bad years. Now, the next, in Pasuk 23, it talks about the redemption of land. What happens if a person was poor and he sold his land? Now, how can he get it back? There are 3 ways. Number 1 is a relative of his can help him out. He can buy back the land from the buyer according to the number of years that are left. Second way is he himself, if he, let's say, starts working and he earns some money, opens business, now he collects some money and he wants to buy his own land back. Not wait 50 years, but he wants to buy it back, he is allowed to. And the buyer cannot restrict him.
And he cannot increase the price. The
He
price
cannot
only going to
increase
be
the
lower.
price. Right. It's gonna, every year is going to be lower. The person himself can buy it, and if he doesn't have relatives who can afford it and he himself cannot, then in the Yovel he will get his land back. So there are 3 ways for him to get the land back after he sold it. However, the only restriction is we want to protect the rights of the buyer, because if you know, as soon as I buy the land, he can buy it back from me. So my whole investment is going to be, I'll get my money back, but it's like I worked to search for the land and to go through the purchase for nothing. So we say you have to allow him to be there for 2 years at least. At least for 2 years, and then you can buy it, so that he gets something from his purchase, and then he can sell it to you. Then we have a different law. What if you have a walled city? In those times it was popular for a community to build a wall around themselves to protect from enemies. So what if you sell a house in such a city? So the law is different. When you sell a house in a walled city, you're allowed to buy it back only within the first year. Only within the first year of selling it. If you don't buy it within the first year, it's sold forever. Right? And
You're not allowed to buy back after?
you are allowed to buy if he wants to sell, but you don't have the right to force him to
Oh, but
sell.
he has an obligation within a year to sell.
Within a year, if you find the means, he cannot stop you. You can buy it back. Why is that? And the reason is because a walled city is a community that, with a wall around it, that needs to protect itself. That's the reason why they built a wall, because usually walled cities were on a border where there were attacks from other countries. And the people who live in a city, they have to feel like they're a community and they're there to stay. If people feel that, oh, I bought, but then soon it's going to go back to its original owner, it's not really mine, so then I don't have to fight for it. If anything, if there's attack, I'm just going to run away. Let them take it, because soon it's not going to be mine anyway. So we say, therefore, anyone who buys land in a walled city, after a year it becomes forever his. Again, to keep this close-knit community that they should fight for their houses. However, if you buy houses anywhere else, outside of the walled city, it's the same law as for land. Another exception is a city that belongs to Levim, Levitical city, which means there were 48 cities throughout the land of Israel that were designated for Levim to live in. And these cities also were designated as refugee cities, cities of refuge, that someone who killed by mistake was able to run there to protect himself from Goel Hadam, relatives of the deceased who would like to take revenge. But because it was not on purpose, he didn't deserve death penalty, and therefore we had special place for him to hide there. And elsewhere we learned about it, that he stays there until the death of Kohen Gadol. And then he goes out for free, and relatives of the deceased are not allowed to touch him anymore. So what about cities of Levites? What if a Levi decides to sell his house to Israel? He has this right. However, he can buy it back anytime. He can buy back his house not only within the first year, but forever. He's not limited. Again, because these cities have to stay Levite cities, they cannot be converted into a regular city. And to prevent it, when a Levi sells his house, he has the right to buy it back anytime he wants. Okay, now we have rules that prevent poverty among Jewish people. What are they? It says like this, in Pasuk 35, if your brother becomes impoverished, you shall strengthen him. How? Which means before he falls down completely, help him. If you know he is about to have foreclosure on his home, and if you just help him with a few months mortgage, you will save him and he'll get back up on his feet. You are obligated to do that. Because once he goes into foreclosure and the bank sells his house, that's it. He's going to be poor for many years to come without a house. However, if you help him before he falls down, it will be much easier. It's like it says that before an animal falls, just a little help, a little support will keep him on his feet. But once the animal falls down, a few men, it will be hard for them to pick an animal up. So too, when a person is about to lose his house or about to lose his business, it's easy to help him, to save him. But when he loses his business and his house, now it's going to require a lot of communal money to help him. One of the ways you can help him, it says, Pasuk 36, do not take from him interest. 37, do not give him your money for interest. Right? This is the famous rule that Jews are not allowed to charge interest from other Jews. You're not allowed to charge interest, and you're not allowed to pay interest if you are the borrower. This is one of the ways to help your fellow Jew to come back and become independently wealthy. There is nothing wrong with taking interest, because this is just payment for the use of your money. However, to your fellow Jew, you have to treat him like a family, and you have to go beyond the letter of the law, which means even though to a non-Jew or a normal business practice it is to lend with interest, but to a Jew, treat him better. And maybe you should suffer a little bit loss and help your friend. So we're not allowed to charge interest or even pay interest, even if you're willing to, you're not allowed on money or on items. It applies to food or any other object. Yeah, if someone wants to borrow from you, he cannot say, can you please give me a dozen eggs and I'm going to return 13 eggs next week. Not allowed. You have to return exactly the same amount. Even if you want, not allowed. Now we speak about Jewish slaves. Pasuk 39. If your brother is sold to you because he's poor, you shall not work him with slave labor. So a Jewish slave does not mean an animal, does not mean a machine or a truck. No. A Jewish slave is still a Jew, he's still a human being. You have to treat him with respect. You cannot give him a regular, what we call slave labor, which means you cannot give him labor that is beneath his dignity. If he is a skilled worker, and now he became poor, so he has to sell himself, you cannot give him menial labor. You have to give him some skillful work to do.
Even if he's willing to do something.
Well, if he's willing and it's not demeaning for him, he's happy to do, then it's fine. But if it's going to hurt him, you're not allowed to.
And that's for every Jew slave, not just your own brother or relative.
Yeah, any slave who is a Jew. Like a laborer or a resident shall he be with you. You have to treat him like a worker that you pay. If a worker is willing for your pay to do the job, he can do the job. But you cannot, a worker, you're not going to force to do something he doesn't want. He can always leave. Unlike a non-Jewish slave, who is really your servant, and whatever you tell him, he has to do. Again, you cannot mistreat him, you cannot abuse him, not allowed, even a non-Jewish slave. He is still a human being. But you can ask him to do for you any job, and he has to do it. Until the Jubilee year. So a Jewish slave is with you.
But Rabbi, at that time, excuse me, how did they check if someone is a Jew? If someone comes to me, my slave, and says I am a Jew, treat me the right way.
Your slave is not going to come to you and say he's a Jew. Before you buy him, you know he's a Jew.
How would you check if he's a Jew or not?
Circumcision.
Well, circumcision is not enough. You need witnesses. You need people to know that he is a Jew. You know his family.
If two people say.
People come and say, yes, he's from our town. We know him. We know his parents. He's a Jew. Again, he has the option always to convert. If we don't believe him that he's a Jew, he can say, okay, from now on, if you don't believe me, let me convert. I'm going to be a Jew. So he becomes a Jew. In Pasuk 44 on page 705, we speak about a non-Jewish slave. Your slave or your maidservant, whom you may own from the Gentiles who surround you, from among them you may purchase a slave or maidservant. Then, two lines later, it says, they shall remain yours as an ancestral heritage, which means, if, let's say, grandfather bought a slave, he stays his slave forever. And even if the grandfather dies, the slave now becomes property of his children. And when the children die, he becomes property of his grandchildren. And not only the slave himself, but the slave's children remain slaves. In Pasuk 47, we speak about the opposite situation, where a Jew becomes so impoverished, and for some reason, no one Jewish wants to buy him, so he sells himself to a non-Jew. So now you have a Jewish slave that belongs to a non-Jew. If your brother becomes impoverished and he is sold to an alien who resides with you, or to an idol worshipper, again, there are three options for him to become free. Either one of his brothers shall redeem him. It's a mitzvah for one of the relatives to redeem a fellow Jew who is sold into slavery by a goy. Or, if his own means become sufficient, he shall be redeemed. For somehow he acquires money, he can go and redeem himself from the non-Jew. Or, in the Jubilee year. He goes free. And on the next page, 707, Pasuk 55 is very important. For the children of Israel are servants to me. They are my servants, whom I have taken out of the land of Egypt. I am Hashem your God. Hashem says Jewish people are servants of God. They should not sell themselves as servants to anyone else, Gentile or a Jew. It's a prohibition for a Jew to sell himself as a slave. And therefore from here a halakha comes. The halakha says that a worker, a Jewish worker, is allowed to leave his job on short notice. You hear? A Jewish worker working for any company or an individual, he is allowed to tell his boss, tomorrow I decided to quit my job, tomorrow I'm not coming. He is allowed, he has this right, and it doesn't matter whether they had a contract or not. A Jew is not allowed to sign a contract, or if you're the employer, you're not allowed to try to
bond someone to do it.
Right, to force somebody to keep the contract. You have to let them go. And that is because we have a prior commitment to God. We are God's servants. We cannot obligate ourselves to be anyone else's servant.
So does it go, well again it's probably to this day it doesn't apply. If I have a job, I should not be going by this rule, right? I should give 2 weeks.
You can. I mean, if you want to be nice, you should. But you shouldn't feel guilty. Sometimes people ask, I feel guilty in my job, they rely on me, they need me, they ask me to stay, I feel bad leaving. And you shouldn't feel bad. You have the right to leave. Just tell them, whatever notice you can give them, a day, a week, or 2 weeks notice, but you don't have to stay there. And they cannot make you feel guilty. Oh, you promise that you're going to stay with us for 5 years, you promise you're going to stay until the end of the year. No.
Rabbi, you're talking about quitting the job?
Yes.
Why? If they let you take off on Shabbat.
No, we're not talking about that. Let's say for some reason you need to switch your job, or for some reason you don't want to work anymore. You want to learn. You want to go to yeshiva. It happens a lot with young boys. They finish college, they start work, and then they become religious, and they say, "I want to go to yeshiva," but my boss was nice, and I promised him I'm gonna, work for 2-3 years, whatever. They don't have to feel bad because they're not allowed to promise.
So a Jew, if he signs a contract, did he make it's a sin?
It's not a sin, it's just something that he is not obligated to follow.
But legally he now is. So in order to avoid that,
He shouldn't be signing them.
He should be signing it.
Right, but now that because he's now legally bound and there will be no consequences.
Whatever the consequence is, let's say he's going to lose his whatever pay or vacation or retirement, whatever it is, he's allowed to do it, and he should do it, because he shouldn't have put himself in such a position. And if you are a Jewish employer, you should not force your workers to sign such contracts, and you shouldn't threaten them. Oh, you cannot leave without a month or 2 week notice. No, they can leave, and this also applies to teachers in yeshiva. If a teacher, let's say a lady, all of a sudden, let's say she becomes pregnant or she gives birth, she has no obligation to go back. She has no obligation. She can, if whatever, let's say she's not feeling well, she can say, that's it, from tomorrow I'm not coming. She has no obligation, no moral obligation, because again, we are free men. We can help somebody and he pays us for our help, but we're not slaves.
So what about, this is among the 613 laws or not, this particular law?
No, it's not marked as a 613 laws, but this is the concept that we follow, that Jews belong to Hashem as servants, and our goal should be that all my free time I'm serving Hashem, and even if I'm at work, I'm only working so that I can live as a servant of Hashem. so that I have food and shelter. That's it. Not because I want the position, I want the honor from my career. No, that has zero value. My only honor comes from being servant of Hashem. My job is only to provide me with money to continue being servant of Hashem. And in chapter 26, the last paragraph, we speak about Avodah Zarah. You shall not make idols, or a statue, or a pillar, or don't put a flooring stone upon which to prostrate oneself. That's why in the synagogue on Yom Kippur, when we bow down on the ground, we're not allowed to bow down on the regular floor. That it shouldn't look like the flooring stone upon which to prostrate oneself. First, you have to put a carpet or plastic, tablecloth, anything to separate between you and the floor. Maybe that's where the custom of Muslims comes, that they put carpet before they bow down. They don't bow down on the floor, because idol worshippers used to bow down on a stone. They would have a special place on a stone floor, and they would bow down to it. But we're not allowed to do that, and not to follow their custom. And then Pasuk 2 says, "My Shabbat shall you observe, and my sanctuary shall you revere."
How many times in the Torah does it mention my Shabbat you have to observe? Because it seems like it mentions it a lot throughout all the
Yes, yeah, it's a good question. If you want, we're gonna stop here. But if you want, you can. There's a book called Concordancia. It's like an encyclopedia that lists all the words in the Torah, all the times that it appears in Tanakh. You can go and count how many times.
Because it seems a lot.
It seems a lot, right?
Which one?
Shabbat, the Shabbat you shall observe.
So that's the end?
That's the end for this. Now, next, this week we have 2 Parshiot, right? So, now we're gonna go through the second Parsha.